Yes, okay, great. Hello and welcome to all of our guests. I see everybody joining us. Great, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Margaret Sena. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of Graduate Student Engagement at El Centro Chicano y Latino. We are so excited today to be really kind of showcasing 3 of our amazing 8 graduate scholars in residence at our center, and also simultaneously doing our very first live stream of our program. So we're very excited that all of you can join us today. A couple words about the format today. We have a little bit of a compressed period of time. We only have an hour and we have 3 presentations to get through. So a couple little business notes about how we are going to carry on the program. First things first is that this meeting is being recorded. If for any reason you don't feel comfortable with your face being recorded, all you can do is just simply switch off your camera so that only your name appears and not your face. We had a little talk about this yesterday, and I see at various times people seeing a turned off camera and kind of, seeing that as a form of rudeness or disengagement. And I just want to let you know that we at El Centro don't see it that way. So if you're not comfortable with the camera being on, that's perfectly fine with us. So switch it off, but please stay tuned for the great presentations and definitely ask a question or two at the end. And so the format today is really that I will be introducing each scholar before they give their presentation. So I will give you an introduction and tell you a little bit about this wonderful person who's about to present. They will present their research, and then we will move on to the next scholar. I will introduce that person, they will present, and so on and so forth. And so that means we will open up to our audience members at about 40 minutes after the hour for Q&A, and questions can be directed towards one presenter or all presenters. We just ask that anybody who asks a question, if we call on you, you can do it that way. If you're in the Zoom meeting, you can do that, and we will just ask you please to try to be as succinct with your questions as possible so that the maximum number of people can ask questions. And certainly, of course, you can ask a question in the chat box, or if you're viewing us with the live stream, you can type your question in the Q&A box, and we will try our best to get to all of our questions, but we do have a limited amount of time today. So, okay, again, thank you very much. And I'd like to just start the program by introducing our first speaker today. I am so excited to share with you Marlene Orozco. Let me tell you a little bit about this person. Marlene Orozco is a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology. A Stanford undergraduate alumna, Marlene earned her bachelor's degree in sociology with honors in 2010 and went on to earn her EDM in education policy and management at the Harvard Graduate School of Education before returning to Stanford. She is currently writing her dissertation and serving as the lead research analyst at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative with Professor Jerry Porras at the Graduate School of Business. Marlene's doctoral research focuses on examining the effects of business ownership and self-employment among Latinos, a population that has long been considered marginal to the US labor market. Using her training as a social scientist, Marlene's work seeks to understand the social and economic impact of Latino-owned businesses, and in doing so, changes how we think about both American entrepreneurship and the contributions of Latinos to our country. Marlene has already had a truly impressive body of published work on these topics that positions her at the forefront of our knowledge about Latino-owned businesses. Among the most recent is her essay, Reconceptualizing the Enclave, Measuring Success Among Latino-Owned Businesses in the Social Science Quarterly this year. She has also shared her research with print and television media outlets, many of them, as a matter of fact, including the San Francisco Chronicle, Bloomberg, Market Watch, Telemundo, CNN en Español, and Univision, among many others. In 2018, Marlene was named 40 under 40 in the Silicon Valley Business Journal. As a graduate student at Stanford, Marlene has thrown herself into mentoring and serves as a wonderful natural leader and a role model for our students. She served before as El Centro as graduate student mentor for our cross-community leadership program called LEAD several years ago, and also was one of our graduate student mentors in the Frosch Scholars program. She shared with us when applying to be a graduate scholar that she really wanted to come home and go full circle and return to El Centro and give back to the comunidad. So please, without any further ado, I'd love to welcome Marlene Orozco, who's going to give you an excellent presentation right now. And this is Marlene's first year as a graduate scholar in residence. Let's all give a big round of virtual applause. Yay for Marlene. Take it away.
Thank you, Margaret, for that introduction. I'm really excited to share some of my research with you all today and hope that this is the beginning of a conversation that we can have, given that I only have 10 minutes to share with you. So today I'm going to be spotlighting research that I've been conducting to really measure the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses. But before I do that, well, first, I want to show a roadmap of our conversation today to make sure that I stay on track. I'd like to start by prefacing the conversation with my personal background. And then I'll spend some time giving you a broad overview of my research activities, broadly speaking, and then I'll dig into some of the latest research findings from this research on the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses. So to start, I'd like to pay homage to my parents first and foremost, Alfonso and Maria Orozco, featured here in my graduation regalia. They are both immigrants from a small town in Jalisco, Mexico, and both of whom have a 6th grade education. And so for both my undergraduate and then my master's program, paid honor and homage to them with sharing the moment at my graduation with them. Now, I think back about my upbringing and kind of this entrepreneurial thread that exists in my background. So growing up, my parents had a business, a small taqueria San Diego. And we had that business for a few years, and it ended up being largely unsuccessful. My dad was a full-time construction worker and didn't have the ability to take on the full risk of being full-time in the business, as we would leave that, we would no longer have that revenue stream coming in from his full-time job. And so there was a lot of lessons to be learned there. And I'd love to share a little bit more about my background and kind of future engagements with you all, but I want to start there and then also end on my work at Stanford. So as a Stanford undergrad, became very familiar with kind of the landscape here, have a really great advisor, Tomas Jimenez, who has subsequently become my dissertation chair advisor. And I found my way in my home at the business school, actually, kind of serendipitously. My home base is in the sociology department, but I conduct research at the Stanford Graduate School of Business through an initiative, the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, which I'd like to now turn and share a little bit more about this work.
Marlene, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Margaret. We are only seeing your Word document and not your PowerPoint right now.
Oh, that's very unfortunate.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, let me, oh no. Did I stop screen sharing?
I see that I'm viewing your screen.
Which screen? This one?
Yeah, well, let's see.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Can you try it again and pull up your PowerPoint? For some reason, a Word doc came up instead of your PowerPoint. I'm sorry.
That's so strange. Can you, okay, so let's try this.
I'm seeing a PowerPoint now.
Okay.
Yes. And it's in the presenter mode.
It's in presenter mode.
Yes.
Which we don't want to be in presenter mode. So let's do that. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I thought we had troubleshooted this.
We did. This is live television.
Woohoo!
Live YouTube, so it happens.
Okay. So I want to go to, what if I do this?
Now
and
that,
then you still see the Word doc?
Yes.
What about, do you still see the Word doc?
Yes.
Oh, that's really unfortunate. Okay, so let me, here, this is what we'll do. I will not go into presentation mode, but I will share my screen. Thanks for alerting me to that. So let's do this, and you all can see my screen, correct? Okay, yeah. So I talked about the agenda. Here is my family. Now you can see, correct?
Yeah, you can see, thank you.
Okay, great. So let me just make sure.
We can still see it, so if you want to just present this way, this is fine.
I think that's what I'll end up doing if that's okay with everybody. Thanks. Okay, so I was here where I was talking about the work of SLAE. And so the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative is a research institute that's based out of the business school within the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. It's been around since 2015, and you can see kind of every year we've had this State of Latino Entrepreneurship report that we've released into the world. The underlying data come from a national survey that we conduct every year with a survey sample of about 5,000 Latino-owned businesses across the country and in Puerto Rico. And most recently, we're developing panels. And so what these research panels allow us to do is to go back to the same group of people over time and see how their experiences have changed. And this has been really critical right now, particularly in the pandemic, as we're trying to capture and measure impact over time of the pandemic. And I show here a book of readings that came out of the work at SLAY as well, Advancing U.S. Latino Entrepreneurship. If we think about entrepreneurship as a subfield or a field within the business world, it's a small and growing field, and minority entrepreneurship within that is even a much smaller field. And in the last few years, we've convened a series of a group of faculty and researchers that study Latino entrepreneurship through a variety of disciplines, including sociology, which is my background, economics, women's studies, urban development, and a few others. And again, those chapters disciplinary perspectives are captured in this book of readings, which I encourage you all to look at if you're so inclined to learn more about this topic of study. And our work is really fueled by the trend in the growth of Latino entrepreneurship. I think it's of no surprise that the Latino population in the United States is large, 18%, representing 18% of the whole population of the United States, projected to be a third by 2060. So alongside this growth in population, we've also seen a growth in new starts of business creation for Latinos. And in fact, this rate of new entrepreneurs is actually outpacing the population growth itself. So here you can see a figure over time. Most recently in 2018, 0.51% of US Latinos became entrepreneurs, which means that out of every 100,000 Latino adults, 510 became entrepreneurs on average in the month, every month in 2018. And if we take a look at the last 10 years alone, the number of Latino business owners has grown 34% compared to just 1% for all others. So we're seeing this entrepreneurial dynamism, particularly within the Latino subset of the population. And so our initiative seeks to better understand both the opportunities that come with this and also the challenges. And as I mentioned previously, most recently, we're doing so through understanding the impact of the pandemic. And I realize that my time here is coming to a close very soon. So I'll give you some teasers, and I hope that, again, the conversation continues moving forward. You can actually access the findings that I'll briefly cover through that short bit.ly link displayed on the right through a research brief that we created on the ongoing impact of COVID-19. And at the start of the pandemic, in March 25th, actually, we released our first survey, and we've subsequently gathered 3 data points in time, as shown in this figure here. So March 25th, which was actually 2 weeks after the World Health Organization declared coronavirus a global pandemic, we knew that this was going to have both an immediate and a negative impact on Latino-owned businesses, particularly here in California, where we had started to see shelter-in-place ordinances take place. First before anybody else kind of across the country. And 1/4 of all Latino-owned businesses are located in California. So again, this we suspected would have both an immediate and negative impact on Latino-owned businesses. We've subsequently gathered additional data points in June and then again in September. And what this figure here shows is that the trends actually in terms of overall impact, negative impact as experienced by Latino business owners, which the caveat here is that we're looking at employer businesses, which means that they have at least one paid employee other than the business owner, him or herself. So this is a particular subset of business owners that we're looking at. We're not looking at sole proprietorships or self-employed individuals with no employees. We're looking at those that in fact, are fueling kind of job creation as the focus of of this report, as that can certainly have a snowballing effect on unemployment rates. And here you can see that the trend actually follows rather closely to national averages for the impact, the negative impact of the pandemic, as gathered by the U.S. Census Bureau. They're doing these experimental surveys as well, these pulse surveys on business owners, and they did so over the span of 9 weeks. And again, our findings track very closely to kind of these national averages. And I think here you can dig deeper into our survey. And again, you can see that the operational impacts in particular are pretty closely felt across the board between Latino business owners and white business owners. And at the time of the survey in June, 1 out of every 4 Latino business owners were experiencing closure. Now, subsequent reports, Yelp came out with a research report that shows that for businesses that are temporarily closed, mainly those in the restaurant industry, they're likely to become permanent closures. So this is something that we're keeping track of over time as well. And I'm going to speed through again. I apologize through a few of these figures coming up here. But what this figure here shows is the distribution of industries that have experienced large negative impacts as a result of the pandemic, and also the proportion of Latino businesses in those industries. So you can see kind of a general trend in the upper right-hand direction, where Latino businesses or Latinos are certainly not just essential workers, they're also essential business owners. The accommodation and food service industry, which is where restaurants are located, is the industry that is reporting the largest negative impacts as a result of the pandemic. And 13% of all Latino employer businesses are located in this sector, which is second only to the construction industry. And so industries certainly have part of the story to tell in terms of impact. Now, we also look at the cash on hand, which is one way in which we can measure potential recovery. So liquidity is an important business kind of measure to determine, again, how long the runway a business has for survival. And we looked at this in 1 out of every 6 Latino-owned businesses that are scaled, which means that they generate at least $1 million in annual revenue, can survive by the end of this year. So even amongst these large and very successful businesses, there is a dire need to access additional relief aid. And for those of you who may be following this closely, the federal government unveiled at the end of March, as part of the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program, also known as the PPP. And this was geared directly or specifically to employer businesses that have people on payroll. And you can see this funnel here in terms of those that were demonstrating a need for funding, and then those who actually applied. So pretty comparable rates in terms of Latino-owned employer businesses and white-owned employer businesses applying for this package or loan. And then we see gaps in terms of who then was actually approved. So Latinos were half as likely to get their funding approved relative to white-owned businesses. And our series of reports kind of uncover historical legacies of discrimination and particularly in access to capital, which I encourage you all to take a look at. And then an even smaller proportion then received all of the funding that they had requested. So I'm coming up here at the end of my time, so I'm going to skip this one, and I want to end on a note of positivity and resilience. I think one of the striking things that our research has uncovered, and this sentiment has been echoed elsewhere, is this overall sense of optimism that Latinos and minority entrepreneurs generally have, despite these challenges of in access to capital and their ability to access relief aid, particularly to address the pandemic. Here we see that 80% of Latino businesses at the time of the survey in June indicated that they were likely to recover as a result of the negative impacts of the pandemic, which is again comparable here to our comparison group of white-owned businesses. And so I'm happy to talk more about why this is in the Q&A, but I do want to be respectful to our other presenters, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. So I want to share here my email. Feel free to reach out with me reach out to me with any questions that you might have. I can talk for hours and hours on end about the data that we've collected, and so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I know we're in a virtual world, but if everybody wants to hit a reaction button, I will do that, and I will give you lots and lots of virtual applause. That was fantastic. Really great really amazing research that you guys have uncovered there. Thank you so much for that. Also, Marlene was kind enough to share her email address in the chat. So that is one way that you can be in contact with Marlene. But also this year, because we have had to take the Graduate Scholars in Residence program virtual, we are having a series of programs that are designed to connect our graduate students, our graduate scholars in residence with undergraduates. And that program is going to be called Ask a Grad Scholar. So definitely look out for Marlene to be on call and ready to answer your questions about sociology and business, and of course, education, 3 fields which Marlene has considerable and enviable expertise in. So thank you again, Marlene. Our next presenter is David González. David González is a PhD candidate in the Emmett Interdisciplinary Program in Environment and Resources at the Stanford School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. David earned his BS degree in evolution and ecology with honors at the University of California at Davis in 2011. He later earned his Master of Environmental Science degree at the Forestry School at Yale University in 2015 before beginning his doctoral program here at Stanford. While working towards his doctoral program at Stanford in Stanford's Earth School, he also earned his master's degree in epidemiology and clinical research at the Stanford School of Medicine. David's research focuses primarily on trying to understand how pollution from extractive industries, including oil drilling and gold mining, affects reproductive health and contributes to health disparities. What is so exciting for us is the way in which David employs his research to mitigate the effects of environmental hazards on vulnerable populations. David is a committed and community-engaged scholar whose research on a variety of environmental health topics such as mercury exposure, oil and gas exposure has already been published in several peer-reviewed journals. David has also served as for the past 4 years, including this year, as one of 2 of our graduate student coordinators for El Centro Chicano y Latino's Frosh Scholars Program. Under David's very capable expertise and advice, we watched this program dramatically increase our enrollment numbers, thanks to his commitment to this program, and we thank David for that. And we also know from all of the feedback that David collected that most of our students always credit this program as making a really positive impact on them as they made their difficult transition into Stanford. All of this transition was made much easier by the commitment of David's overseeing this program and David serving as a fantastic mentor himself. You can see why we consider ourselves very lucky to have David be one of our 8 graduate scholars in residence, and this is his 2nd year as a graduate scholar in residence. So take it away, David. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Margaret. Just want to confirm, could you shake your heads or give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? And you can see my presentation. Great. If you hear some barking, that is these 2 right here. This is Ollie and Biscuit, who I'm seeing for the week. So I just want to give an overview, just a kind of a taste of the work that I'm doing that Margaret mentioned. My research, I use methods from epidemiology to look at understudied environmental exposures. We're applying quasi-experimental designs to do causal inference in health and environmental studies. And also, because I'm in an interdisciplinary program, bringing in critical theory from the social sciences to try to get a better understanding of health disparities. So I'll talk about 2 projects briefly. One will be oil drilling and air quality and preterm birth risks in the San Joaquin Valley of California. And I'll talk briefly about some of my work in the Peruvian Amazon. This is what oil and gas exposures look like in California. This is an image, aerial image of Bakersfield. You can see here like neighborhoods, churches, elementary schools adjacent to one of the largest oil and most productive oil fields in the state. This is what it looks, this is Bakersfield, California. This is what it looks like on the ground. Well, we can see different stages of oil and gas production, new wells being drilled, wells operating, abandoned wells. And we know that these wells may emit pollutants that can be harmful to people. Despite that, though, there's very little regulation. So there's evidence of an association between living near unconventional wells, so fracking sites, and adverse birth outcomes, which is what I study. And that's a lot of that evidence has come from other states. until recently. And both unconventional wells, fracking wells, and conventional wells, which are predominant in California, produce air pollution that can be harmful to health, and other sources of pollution and contamination as well that can cause stress and exposures to other things that people shouldn't be exposed to. And many people are exposed. Over 1.5 million people live within 1 kilometer of a well in California. Nationally, 17 million US residents live within 1 mile of an active oil well. And as I mentioned before, despite this, there's no regulations throughout the state. There's some local regulations, but a bill recently failed in the state Senate and committee that would have created a 2,500-foot setback between wells and homes. And that protection does not currently exist. So in my research, I'm trying to understand, provide some evidence that hopefully can guide policy. So for the first question I'm going to talk about today, we looked at to what extent do oil and gas pre-production wells, so wells that are being drilled and wells that are producing, increased concentrations of ambient air pollutants that we know are harmful in California. So we use a quasi-experimental method. If you don't know what that means, talk to me later. I'm happy to explain what we're doing. We're leveraging, sorry, this is a bit technical, panel data set. So we observe the same units, the same things through time. So we have many years of data on air quality and oil production. And we control for things that we know can affect air quality, seasonality, geographic factors, secular time trends. That just means things that change through time, technologies get better, policies change. We can control for all these in our analysis. And then we can use wind direction as a source of random variation. In my field, we don't do randomized controlled trials. We can't randomly assign people to receive pollution. We can't randomly assign babies to live near oil wells. But we can try to find natural experiments that can simulate these effects. So we looked at exposure to wells upwind of air monitors throughout the state, US EPA air monitors. And then we did a placebo test where we looked at downwind air monitors where we don't expect to see any pollution. And I do want to highlight this as a collaboration with an undergraduate researcher through the SURGE program at the Earth School. If there's anyone out there that's watching that's not at Stanford Earth, or not at Stanford, there's summer opportunity to get involved with research. It's just a map of where our air monitors are. The triangles are air monitors, and the shaded areas show where oil and gas drilling is happening throughout the state of California. You can see it's widespread, and a lot of the activity is in the central San Joaquin Valley of the state. And just to give you a sense of what this looks like, this circle in the middle here is just a diagram of an air monitor, and those little X's are oil wells that are being drilled on this particular day. And this is just to show we can look where the wind was coming from over a 20-year span on a daily basis. We can look at where the wind was coming from, and we can assess how much exposure. We can assess how much exposure the monitors had to oil wells. And that gets this result. Hot off the presses, just made this figure yesterday. So this is a preliminary result. Let me walk you through what we're looking at. Let's look at the third row here, so panels E and F. So in the left column, we have so concentrations of different air pollutants, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulate matter, PM2.5, small particles, similar to what we breathe in when there's wildfire smoke, and sulfur dioxide. Let's look at PM2.5. That's the third row, fine particulate matter. So what we're seeing, we looked at what's the effect of adding one additional drilling site, one additional well, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, et cetera, upwind. How does it affect concentrations of air pollution, controlling for everything that I mentioned earlier, and comparing air monitors to themselves. So we're looking at days when they had a well upwind compared to days when they didn't have any wells. And as you can see, we have an increase of 2 micrograms per meter cubed of PM2.5 for an additional well being drilled between 1 and 2 kilometers. If you look at our placebo test, the downwind wells on the right, as we expected, we don't see any association. There's no effect of having a downwind well on particulate matter concentrations. This is, to us, pretty compelling evidence that these sites are emitting high levels of PM2.5 that may be harmful to health. A 2 microgram per meter cube increase may be associated with a 3% increase in the risk of preterm birth and the risk of many other respiratory, cardiovascular, many other health outcomes as well. So we're finding high concentrations of air pollution downwind from drilling sites. We used a large data set, and we think this is relevant for epidemiological studies like the one I'm going to tell you about right now. So in this study, which was recently published, we looked at whether being exposed to new and active wells in the San Joaquin Valley was associated with increased risk of preterm births. That's delivery before 37 weeks. It's harmful for, it's a leading cause of infant mortality and can increase risk of morbidity and have long-term effects for the infant's health. So for this study, we zoomed into the San Joaquin Valley of California, where oil and gas drilling is concentrated. They're near Bakersfield in the southern region. Bakersfield is where I showed you that picture of earlier. And for this, we assessed exposure. We estimated how exposed each mother was of 225,000 births. We assessed for each birth how exposed the mother was to oil wells in her neighborhood. So this is a cartoon diagram to show what that looks like. We did that for different categories of preterm birth. We did it to look at exposure in different trimesters, because evidence shows that particular windows of exposure may be more harmful for increasing risk of preterm birth. So we did that, and I'll just show you some results really briefly. These are odds ratios and 95% confidence intervals. Again, happy to talk about that more in Q&A or offline, but essentially when we're working in epidemiological studies, when we're looking at odds ratios, if the odds ratio and the 95% confidence interval is on one side of 1, then we're seeing either an increase in the risk if it's above 1 or a decrease in the risk if it's below 1. So you can see that we see what we'd say a statistically significant result, higher risk of preterm birth in the middle. If we're looking at the middle plots, higher risk of preterm birth for exposure in trimesters 1 and 2 for this 28 to 31, so births at 28 to 31 weeks, so pretty severe preterm births. We don't see that for later preterm births. With respect to disparities, this is what we see when we stratify or categorize based on the mother's race or ethnic status. So in red, we see the births to Hispanic mothers. In green, births to non-Hispanic Black mothers or women. And then in blue, births to non-Hispanic white women. And you can see that for the blue, so the non-Hispanic white women, the odds ratios are at or below 1. So that means the ones that are at 1, we're not seeing any association between exposure to oil wells and preterm birth among white women. But we see higher risks, higher odds among Hispanic and non-Hispanic Black women. We're not sure why, but this is something I'm trying to focus on moving forward. So we're seeing higher odds of preterm birth with high exposure to wells. Risk is confined and heightened among births to women of color and to women with lower educational attainment. In the last minute, I want to talk about another very different study that I'm involved in. So as a PhD student, I've just been describing my dissertation work. I've also been able to stay involved with some work, some global health work in Peru, which is where I did my master's thesis research before starting out at Stanford. And I've been able to keep a foot in the world there and publish a paper recently and have a few papers in the works on a different issue, which is the issue of artisanal gold mining. Artisanal gold mining, this is an image of the Peruvian Amazon, Madre de Dios region from the sky. And you can see here the effects of artisanal gold mining. So this used to be 20 years ago, a heavily forested region. It has since been deforested for gold extraction by informal gold miners who use lots of mercury. And the mercury, this is the largest global source of mercury pollution in the world, is artisanal gold mining. It's associated with a range of bad health outcomes. And this part of Peru has the most intensively mined part for artisanal gold mining. And there's some evidence, so we know that there's widespread exposure, but we wanted to understand disparities, exposure disparities. I'll try to explain this very succinctly, given that the time is short. So what we did is we went around and we collected hair samples and did surveys, hair samples to analyze mercury exposure among over 1,000 residents of Madre de Dios. Here's a map. Here it is in southeastern Peru. These are the communities that we went to. And our objectives were to assess mercury exposure, compare exposure and risk factors among subpopulation of concern, indigenous residents, women of childbearing age, children who are disproportionately impacted, and workers in gold mining. And we wanted to look at intersectional disparities. So here's just our results in sum. So the dotted line is 2.2 micrograms per gram. That's the WHO, the World Health Organization's limit, that above which there may be harmful effects of mercury. You can see that for each point here is one person's mercury exposure. You can see high levels of mercury exposure for most of the population, and that indigenous folks on the furthest left, residents of indigenous communities, have the highest exposure to mercury. I don't have too much time to go into this, but for this, we're looking at intersections. So what does it mean to, people have multiple features, multiple identities. What does it mean to be an indigenous female gold miner? We found, for example, compared to an indigenous female who doesn't engage in gold mining. So we looked at different exposures along these different stratifications, and we found some important differences that we think is something that people should consider when we're trying to design interventions to reduce mercury pollution in the first place. So we found widespread exposure, higher exposure with fish consumption in indigenous communities, indigenous population, and working in mining, indigenous residents were the most at risk. And there may be belonging to certain marginalized groups, and intersecting marginalized groups may be more harmful to health for various reasons. And we need more work with indigenous communities because they are disproportionately impacted and do not benefit from gold mining. So that is my work. I'll leave it there, and we'll be happy to talk about all of this. My email and Twitter handle are there, and I'll put it in the chat as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was an excellent presentation. A little bit more virtual applause for our wonderful graduate scholar in residence, David. Thank you very, very much. Okay, I'm going to move quickly to our third presenter. And our third presenter is also in the first year of the program, and her name is Emily Ashkin. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Emily Ashkin is a second-year PhD student at the School of Medicine in the Cancer Biology program. Originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, Emily completed her undergraduate work at Rice University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and cell biology with distinction in research, along with a minor in anthropology. As an undergraduate, Emily was awarded the Presidential Award at the MD Anderson Cancer Center for her work as a student intern there. Emily's research focuses on examining precisely how cancer, or more specifically, cancerous tumors, impact the surrounding environment in the human body in which they grow. Emily does this by researching how proteins that serve as tumor suppressors inhibit the growth of cancerous cells. She is specifically curious about how the loss of tumor suppressors impacts cancer cells evading the immune system in the lungs, which are home to the largest portion of T cells in the human body. This research holds important clinical applications for what we can offer patients with lung cancer, and of course, more broadly, to the medical fields of oncology and immunotherapeutics. Since coming to Stanford last year in 2019, Emily has proven herself to be an excellent role model for our undergraduates. Last year, she worked as a mentor and served in a variety of mentorship programs, including Stanford Advance, Feeling First Gen, and Científico Latino. When asked why she wanted to serve as a graduate scholar this year, Emily told us that El Centro had been invaluable to her transition to Stanford, and she was eager to pay it forward. You can understand why we at El Centro are so happy that she decided to apply. Because as you can see, Emily's work is exciting and really full of all kinds of promise. And we are really excited to hear her first presentation here at El Centro. This is her first year as a graduate scholar in residence. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Okay. I'm sharing my screen.
We can see it.
Can everybody see? Okay, cool. Hola familia, my name is Emily, and today I'm going to be talking to you about using immunotherapy to treat lung cancer. So over the past 100 years, there have been three main pillars of cancer treatment: surgical removal, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy. But over the past 20 years, two new pillars have been added as options for cancer patients: precision or targeted therapy and immunotherapy. So precision targeted therapy takes into account all of the genetic and molecular information for each patient, like how our immune systems respond to a cold or virus, such as COVID. So combination therapy is based on the idea that we see here in But then we see here in red that the combination of targeted therapy and immunotherapy for each individual patient has the potential to result in much better prognosis for patients. This is the goal here. We are nowhere near that, especially in lung cancer, which is the leading cause of cancer-related deaths for both men and women worldwide, leading to approximately 1.76 million deaths per year. Oftentimes, lung cancer is detected at much later stages when the tumor is most aggressive and has potentially moved to other organs already. So I discussed immunotherapy is based on the power of the body's own immune system, using that to fight cancer. So we have these cells called T cells, and they essentially behave like drones. T cells are white blood cells that have left the bloodstream and migrated towards the cancer, and they can be programmed to recognize and attack the cancer cells, much like a drone. Ideally, if the T cell recognizes the cancer cells, they attach to them and release thousands of proteins that induce cancer cell death. But the cancer cells have an ability to put on a mask that makes them unrecognizable to T cells over time. And this results in T cell exhaustion because T cells get tired of looking for the cancer cells, they give up and can no longer function. It's kind of like how once a bee uses its stinger, it dies. And so once a T cell has searched too long for the cancer cell, it also dies. Therefore, the question is, how do we unmask cancer and make this process more efficient? So previous approaches have been devoted to enhancing the killing abilities of the T cells, modulating the drones, trying to make the drones stronger and more effective, but that's only shown moderate success. Now, our approach thinks more deeply about the specific genes and mutations that drive the lung cancer formation and how they may alter over time, allowing the cancer cells to then put on that mask. So we conducted a screen of 50 genes commonly mutated in lung cancer, and we prioritized genes that are more commonly mutated in Black, Indigenous, and Latinx populations of patients. Broadly speaking, there are major disparities in healthcare today, and I wanted to factor this into my methodology as part of my practice for basic science level research. We can talk for hours about this if you want to. But we were testing to see how these mutations individually impact tumor growth and evasion in T cells. And essentially, the goal is to best understand the mechanisms that drive tumor formation and how they ultimately impact how the cancer cells can mask themselves from T cell recognition. The ultimate goal would be to develop therapies that specifically target these mechanisms and enhance T cells in combination therapy. So basically, there are two necessary components for proper T cell recognition and attacking. There's the binding region, which is already going to be found on the surface of cancer cells. And then there's the binding peptide, which is much more difficult to present because this comes onto the surface of the cancer cells using the previously described mechanisms of these gene mutations. So each binding peptide can be referred back to a specific gene mutation, essentially. But that becomes complicated when the cancer cell is who's in charge of manipulating the mutations and what's going to be present on the surface. And so I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but we established these gene mutations in mice and tracked tumor formation driven by each gene mutation, as well as compared the quantities of T cells present in each tumor microenvironment. So for our screen, we found that mutations for specific genes resulted in growth of larger tumors and smaller quantities of T cells. This means that these tumors are better capable of putting on their masks and exhausting the T cells. So my goal is to understand what makes these tumors not responsive to T cell-based immunotherapy. And so a common trend we noticed was that mutations in what's called the Cohesin Complex displayed this increased tumor growth and decreased T cell quantity. So the Cohesin Complex is fundamental to basic cell cycle and mitosis processes, but very little is understood about the impact of mutations in this complex. And so I'm particularly interested in mutations in the gene or protein called STAG2, which I like to think of as the diamond ring, is the diamond of the diamond ring that is the whole cohesin complex. So now my project is to dive deep into understanding who STAG2 is and why it matters for lung tumor development, and how STAG2 may fundamentally play a role in masking lung cancer from T cells. And so I'm going to spend the next few years of my PhD going down rabbit holes and coming up with crazy experiment ideas and having fun getting lost in the beauty that is genetics and molecular biology. And so please come talk to me if you are interested in medicine or getting involved in medical research or applying to medical school or graduate school. If you experience imposter syndrome, if you're struggling with chemistry, if you want to learn more about Argentina, or any reason at all, I love to talk. Please reach out. My email is here, and I actually answer my DMs on Twitter, so feel free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. There was so much amazing information packed in that very, very compressed presentation. We're really appreciative to you. So we are now not doing bad at all for time. We're about 15 minutes before the hour. So please note that all three of our presenters, please again, give them a little bit of virtual applause for their excellent presentations today. We thank them for making their email addresses visible to our audience members, and especially our undergraduate audience members, who are always welcome to connect with them, especially in our new program called Ask a Grad Scholar. Thank you also for the chemistry help offer. Emily, I know a lot of our undergraduates would appreciate that. So thank you again to Marlene, who had to leave to go to her next appearance. So I think she may have left the call, but also to David and also to Emily. Great presentations. Okay, so now we are at the fun part of the presentation time where we can move to question and answers and your questions from the audience members to all of you who are on our Zoom call and even on our live stream. And we would love to hear any questions that you have. Please, when you ask a question, it's really helpful if you specify which presenter you are directing your question to, or if your question is for all three of them. So the question goes out to all of you. Hay preguntas. Any questions, guys? Anybody want to ask the first one?
I'd just like to specify really quickly that we are taking questions through the Zoom chat as well as on the YouTube, the chat comments. So please feel free to ask your questions through that method as well.
No questions. I may have to call on people because I see some names of folks I know. Anybody have a question? Or I think actually, again, I'm sorry, the questions would really be directed towards David or Emily. Okay, David, I'll start us off. Do you have a quick, I mean, you gave us three really excellent studies in a really short amount of time. Are there key takeaways about vulnerabilities of specific populations from environmental hazards from the three? I mean, you look at these three different case studies in three geographic areas. Do you sort of have like one kind of overarching takeaway from all three of those studies that you did?
I think the overarching takeaway is we need to be a lot more thoughtful as epidemiologists and population health scientists about trying to understand the social environments and the interactions of the social environments with environmental exposures. So, for example, when we're seeing disparities in exposure to oil and gas and preterm birth, well, first of all, we want to do a follow-up study and just see if we can confirm that result. Others have found similar results. But if we see racial disparities, what we're seeing is an effect of structural racism. And of course, that is going to be, the context of that is going to be dependent on the social environment and policy environment of California. And with indigenous populations in Peru, similarly, there's a deep history of oppression, of violence, of policies that have marginalized that population. But hard to so yeah, there's some similarities there, but there's a lot that we don't know. And actually, when we look at neurological impacts of mercury in indigenous populations in Peru, we're working with the population that has the highest mercury exposure in the country. But we don't see the same response to mercury exposure that we see in other populations, in part because other populations that have been studied are usually European, and we just don't typically have the capacity to do these long-term, sustained longitudinal studies with indigenous communities. Lots of reasons for that we have to get into, but there's just so much that we don't know when we're trying to understand these disparities. And I think having a focus on it and being very thoughtful and working with social scientists is extremely important.
Great. I mean, sad news, but really great research. Thank you for that very thoughtful answer. I did get a question. I think it's coming from the live stream, and this question is for both of you, Emily and David. Someone asked, what was the most difficult part of your research, and how did you each overcome this? I'm assuming the question is about doctoral research, but you can answer it. You can, of course, answer it based on undergraduate research too, if you like.
I could start. Yeah, there are definitely some low points for both of these sort of arms of research. I think it was about a year ago with both projects. One, I was hitting this issue with just the results weren't making sense. They weren't consistent. I just wasn't able to like really pick apart what the story was coming out of my study. And the other project was more logistical. We had a paper in review, and we were getting some hard questions from our reviewers about our human subjects, you know, our ethics review. And for both of them, I was like, oh man, this is hard. This is a lot of work. I don't really know how to navigate this. I'm not really sure what to do. So, you know, it took me a while to just sit with that and then to seek advice. And that's what I did for both of those projects. I found mentors that I trust, and I said, hey, this is the issue that I'm having. What should I do? And I got the advice that I needed. So the lesson that I took from that was that these low points are natural with any project, and that part of being in a community is finding people and asking for their help. And because of that, I had both those papers were published now and are available, and I'm building on both of those studies with the current work I'm just sharing.
Excellent. Wonderful. Emily.
Yeah, I'd say can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say scientifically, something I always struggle with is making sure that I've designed the right model system for which I'm asking questions so that it can be realistic and applicable to actual patients. Because it'd be very easy to make this magical made-up system in which I've created this fake realm of science. And I don't want that. I want to be able to work with something that can be applied to people. And so that's probably one of the biggest things that I struggle with scientifically. I think, I mean, personally, I make lots of mistakes on the day-to-day in lab. And I think something I'm always grappling with is like figuring out how to separate like my self-worth and how I value myself from the mistakes that I've made in my experiments, or from experiments not going well, or from a hypothesis being incorrect. So I haven't figured out how to overcome that yet, but it's a work in progress. I don't know if that'll ever go away.
Thank you so much. And we do all learn so much from our mistakes. So that's a really important point to say. And the other thing is I do want to plug, as you're talking about this, talking about you being a second year and learning from your mistakes, I do want to give a quick plug for a graduate program that we have coming up on November 10th. And we have this panel that we do every year, and it's called How to Thrive at Stanford. And that really focuses on the tough transition year that is one's first year in a graduate program, but especially in a doctoral program, when people are just making a transition from really kind of being an undergraduate and going through courses courses and doing that pretty easily through exams, and then coming to a graduate program where you are expected to be really a creator of knowledge and think of yourself suddenly as a professional in a field that you are still learning. It is a very tough transition. And I thank you, Emily, for being really open, because I think all of us felt that in our early years in a PhD program, and that's very normal. And through sharing that in the program and the panel that we have on the 10th, it really gives our first years a little bit of reassurance to say, oh yeah, everybody's feeling this. This isn't just me. Literally everybody in my program is feeling the same way. They're just not maybe talking about it openly. So that's an important point. Any more questions? Oh, I see one in the chat. And this is from one of our wonderful Stanford alumni, Laura. Let's see. Thank you both for pointing out the models that can be applied, as well as the importance of asking for help with those whom we trust. Excellent point. Any surprises that either of you encountered as you conducted your research? Oh, I love that question. What surprised you? What came as a surprise when you were conducting your research? And the question is, it could be in a lab situation or in the field. Excellent question, Laura. Thank you for that. And I think that's directed towards both Emily and David. Surprises.
Well, I have one that it's not a surprise to me, but it's something that I was surprised. Well, okay, let me talk about it. So it's a different project. It's not the project I'm talking about. So I'm collaborating with some social scientists colleagues we're going into communities across California to ask about how they perceive of and respond to wildfire smoke risk. So wildfire smoke, as many of us have experienced, it's getting worse, and it's projected to continue getting worse. And something I've planned to study when I finish my PhD is the health impacts of that. But there's been an assumption that I've seen in some places that this affects everybody. Everyone is equally impacted by wildfire smoke. And I think it's not a surprise for the communities of color. We heard this with COVID, like, oh, it affects everybody. It's a great equalizer. Of course it's not. Wildfire smoke is the same way. Of course it's not. But why isn't it? What are the mechanisms there? So as an epidemiologist, I'm interested in asking those questions. As a part-time social scientist, I'm interested in trying to understand how we can design epidemiological studies where we can answer those questions properly. So one thing when we're going out and talking to people about their experiences with wildfire smoke is, well, I said to the team I'm working with, well, we need to do interviews in Spanish, and we need to talk to folks that don't have access to information that's available in English. I think that's extremely important to think about that because of the disparities that we see. So it's what we're seeing preliminarily is, and again, this is not going to be a surprise to those of us here, but California residents who are non-English speakers who speak Spanish are getting information from different sources than English speakers when it comes to wildfire smoke. Their perceptions are different of the risks, and much of the information is not targeted for that population, despite the structural inequities that have led to disproportionate impacts. So that's something that will be a surprise, I think, in the literature, but again, not a surprise to me. So maybe I didn't answer your question well, but it's the first thing that I thought about, like the surprise of like, hey, like let's ask these questions. Let's talk to people about their experiences and try to like understand what's going on.
Yeah, those are cool points. I think for me, what's most surprising is how interdisciplinary my work can be, because I entered a cancer genetics lab. It's a very umbrella term. And I thought I was going to be focusing on just cancer genetics, but it's really cool to take ownership for a project, because then I kind of take a more Socratic approach in that I just let the science tell me what direction to take. So it's like from one result, I now go into a direction of immunology. From another, it's now computational biology. From another, it's chromatin biology. And it's cool how many skills, it's surprising how many like new concepts and skills that I have to pick up just by the nature of following my project in whatever direction it wants to go. So I think that's cool and surprising to me, because I'm a type A person and I like to have like everything in order and everything. I like to have a plan and be prepared ahead of time. And so I'm losing all of that in my science, which I think is making my science better and more valuable.
I love that. Thank you so much, Emily. We're almost at time, but I got a really good question in the chat box from our live stream, and I wanted to ask this. It's a great question. So someone wrote, you both mentioned it a little bit in your presentation. What drove you to your current doctoral studies, and what keeps you going during the low points? That's a great question.
Many things brought me to where I am today. I had a childhood illness that was undiagnosed, so that made me want to study health and how to prevent those kind of things from happening. Obviously, I've recovered from that, but it was a pretty profound experience I had as a kid. I think that made me curious about health. Experiences in the environment that I grew up in, which was I grew up on the central coast of California, so at once it's very beautiful, but it's also simultaneously a very, racially segregated, highly segregated part of the state, and a place with many layers of environmental disasters, nuclear plants on earthquake fault lines, high levels of air pollution, endangered species, the largest oil spill in the state of California in a predominantly Latinx community, just a few miles from where I grew up. So lots of those questions, and then realizing that the thing that keeps me motivated is experiences, seeing how, yes, communities know what's happening. Like, we need to listen to communities when it comes to environmental pollution. Communities know what's happening. And as a scientist, I want to provide evidence that can, I guess in partnerships, I work in close collaboration with some community groups to try to understand their perspectives and what I can bring as a scientist. And then also bringing my perspective as an epidemiologist and saying, to document, I guess, scientifically harm from these sources of pollution that communities have identified. Because unfortunately, the way that the policies work, that work is necessary and often necessary and insufficient, because it is hard to create policies that can protect communities. So growing up in an oil and gas community, growing up with a family that lived in segregated communities for most generations of my family, this is what I want to do. And I wake up every day knowing that the work that I do can and hopefully does matter to communities, to policymakers, to the scientific community. So I feel really lucky that I'm in the 5th year of my PhD program and still love what I do, and I'm really motivated to keep going.
So I first became drawn to cancer research after my mom had skin cancer. That kind of was like my first point of inspiration and what motivated me to try to better understand the disease. I think since that point, though, as a basic scientist, the day-to-day, it's hard for me to see the direct impact of my work because I do work at such a small scale level. And as a basic scientist, I'm not going to be the person who brings the treatment to patients. I understand the difference between my responsibility and the responsibility of medical doctors. But I think what drives me on a day-to-day is the impact I can have directly through mentorship. With each new thing that I learn, with each new technique or method or question I learn how to ask, I continue to pass that on to more people and bringing others into science. And the more people that we can bring in, the more perspectives, and the better the outcome can be ultimately.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are now 3 minutes over time. So I do want to be respectful that I know people have very busy schedules and they have places to go. I want to just absolutely send a huge thank you to our 3 excellent presenters. One who had to leave our call, unfortunately, early, Marlene Orozco, PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology, David González, PhD candidate in the EIPER program at Stanford Earth School, and of course, Emily Ashkin, our great second year, great PhD student in the School of Medicine and the Cancer Biology program. Thank you to all three of you. You gave fantastic presentations. Thank you to our audience members. Thank you to those of you who joined us for our first live stream. We at the professional staff at El Centro were joking that now we have a new a channel name, that's called Centro Visión. So look out for more productions by the Centro Visión, bringing you great quality programs since 1978. Well, we haven't been doing that, but since today anyway, but the center has been there since 1978. Again, look out, keep in touch with us on our social media accounts for new and upcoming events. And we just want to give a great thank you to all of our audience members and our presenters. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon